I'm Annabelle Lambert, and I'm here with my regular co-host, Rob Pye. Say hello, Rob Pye.
Hi, hi.
We are delighted, as always, to be joined by a guest today. And today we are joined by Clare Richmond, who we have known for some years, but recently authored The Scavenger Mindset. And when we first knew Clare, she was the founder of the Crouch End Project, which was all about I guess enabling communities, business, and local areas to work much better, more collaboratively to get a better outcome for the local community and everyone involved. And she has made that part of many things that she's absolutely brilliant at, but part of what she wants to bring to the world. And the Scavenger Mindset is an outpouring of everything I think that she's probably learned over many years of involvement in that community business space. So I'm going to hand over to Clare and ask her to tell us about yourself, Clare, who you are, where you are, what you do, what you're about. Please share what you wish to share.
Yes, hello, you two. Nice to see you again. So I think the things that I really want to share is the work that I'm currently doing, which has been very much inspired by my work with the Crouch End Project, which really is all about how to help leaders manage the challenges of the far more complex world that we're working in. Because um, I sort of I've had two key leadership experiences in my life. I mean, obviously, the moment you're born into some form of leadership. You have a family of some kind. You have teachers. Your leadership is just part and parcel of the world that we live in. But at 26, I became a sales marketing director for a small organization that was working with radio. And that was a fairly conventional sort of leadership experience in that it was very target driven. It was about, all our success was measured on our ability to meet the predetermined outcomes. And to some extent, I always thought about that experience as one which was not really working with reality, but trying to control it. And as such, it made for a very stressful and I think fairly unproductive environment to work in. I mean, even in my 20s, I could see that we were not very successful at managing emerging information. When things changed, there was no narrative for that. There was no allowance for that. There's very little flexibility. And people were very much worked to their role rather than what their full capacity could be. So I had always found it. I mean, I loved the job on many levels, but I found it really just not very satisfying in terms of being able to meet what I believed our potential could be. But nonetheless, it was the sort of setup that we were all used to. There are people in charge and there's people slightly below them who have slightly different functions, and we all sit within our boxes. Um, and then I set up this Crouch End Project initiative. And on paper, I mean, you couldn't have had a more different scenario. I mean, I really didn't know what I was doing. I knew what I wanted to achieve. I was very clear about that. But I had none of the usual, enticements to get people involved. I didn't have any resources. I didn't have any money. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have any permission. Nobody had asked me. There'd been no, so I had no contacts. So really, it didn't look on paper very promising. But yet, within 18 months, what we had achieved as a group, because without a doubt, when you have nothing, you have to work with what you can find. So I worked with what I considered to be the most important thing on the high street at the time, which was the businesses. That seemed to me like the first stepping point. And indeed, that was a brilliant way to begin. It was a great way to sort of, energize a resource. So I worked with them, and within 18 months, we'd worked with nearly 200 businesses and organizations. We'd involved schools, local hospitals, libraries, and there had just been an incredible sense of connection and energy. And it had just, the results we got very quickly just completely exceeded my expectations, which had been understandably fairly low. But that experience taught me something I think really powerful about what matters most to people, about how to motivate people, how people are motivated, and just how much more people are capable of when you create the right conditions for them to work. And without doubt, I think it was almost a fact that I didn't know how to do it, which allowed us to create an environment where we could work in an open, honest way. And it allowed me to create an environment where everybody was welcome, and yet we had a very clear sense of what it was we wanted to achieve. So it wasn't a sort of free for all. I mean, one of the things I've learned about not having very much is that you have to use what you have very wisely. You cannot afford to waste time and money on things that aren't going to have an impact. So being really focused about where you have an impact and what matters most was incredibly helpful. So that experience, and there's, trying to cut a rather long story short, gave me great hope actually, and fired me up. But perhaps far more interesting was what then happened next, because I began to, without meaning to, I was going to go back to my old job in marketing, but I then began to get contacted by local authorities and local government saying, could you come and replicate the success you've had here over here? And of course, by this time we had Mary Portas, and this was, before the financial crash, my project. But
I think it's
by the
worth
time it
saying.
was done,
I think it's worth saying, Claire. This was like 2007, wasn't it, or something? I was
that's
looking.
when I
It's just a
began the
long time
project.
ago.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And yet it was very clear that the high street was in trouble then. And, that for me, one of the interesting things about it was I had assumed that it was a marketing problem. And one of the most important lessons I learned was, because I didn't know, I had to go and find out. And that meant having lots of conversations with people. And I very quickly understood this wasn't a marketing problem, this was a mindset problem. And the mindset was, this isn't our problem. This is a local authority parking rents rates problem. We have nothing, And there was also, I think, a sense that it's one of the classic problems that, something set up. It was set up to be a local and convenient way to shop. It no longer fulfilled that. So you need to change. You need to think, well, if you can't be that, what can you be? And that precipitated some really interesting conversations about what really matters most to people about a high street. And for me, just that ability to create that environment where you can really face down some quite difficult conversations with people. Why should somebody shop with you? You're neither local convenient, you don't have the range, you can't offer us the price range. So what is your point? And you have to have a very safe environment to have those sorts of conversations. And what the point is the reason I was there, because this is a local community and nobody wants to live in a ghost town. So there's your great starting point. So it was a fascinating experience on many levels about sort of, working out what really matters most in a situation and where you have influence to make a difference. And that whole process took months to get to. My assumption that it was marketing was wrong. My assumption that everybody would get on, that they all had a very close relationship and that they all understood the same thing was wrong. And understanding that, spending time, investing time in building those relationships that were going to work over the long term, no matter what happened, was the single most important thing I did. And the lessons I then learned when I began to get, pulled out to go and do a sort of advisory consultancy role in other areas was the potential was there in every single community I went to work in, every single group. There were people with great ideas, energy, and imagination. The problem was always consistently the approach that was taken. And I don't blame anybody in this. It's just the fact that we've gone through a bit of a shift in the world, and we haven't been brought up to work with a world where we don't know what to expect. We keep thinking we know what to expect and we can control and order it. And if you have that approach, you will never achieve the sort of success that I achieved with very little money. But you just build those relationships and understand, and and I think very carefully about the assumptions that you're making when you walk into it. So those two experiences, working in the world of media and marketing, top down, then setting something up from the bottom up and discovering the wonders of operating in a slightly different way, but a highly effective way, and then going back to a top-down approach to try and introduce what I've already done very successfully, but through a different approach, just made me realize that we're really getting some very simple but significant things wrong. So that's been my journey. I went and did an MA at that point because I just thought, this is crazy. We are wasting so much. And more than anything, we are creating environments where people are getting incredibly, we're holding people to untenable tasks. We're expecting leaders to be responsible for being right, where there is very often no particular answer and their job is less and less about being right and more about curating conditions for people to become the best they can be. And I just look around at the world we live in, and I look around at the world my children have grown up in, and the gap between their potential and the way that we measure and define success is considerable. The gap is all about we are very narrow in our expectations of what we think success should be and what it looks like, and that is damaging people, and that's damaging, and it's also, in my view, very, very unproductive. So the world I went into was in my MA doing leadership was fascinating, and it made me realize that everything that I had experienced other people were experiencing and doing far better than I did. And so Scavenger Mindset is my book. And really, it just felt, I just needed to get it out. I just needed to say to the world, you know what? If we just change our perspective a little, we can open up so much more. We can reveal much a happier way to operate, and a far more successful way to be. And that's based not just on my own experience, but on the research and studying and the work I've done with leaders from all types of organizations. So I feel very strongly, but hopefully, that everything we need in the world we already have. We just need to readdress our mindset and just nudge ourselves to think slightly differently, really, about what the optimum role of leadership is. Because I know that people are capable of far more with much less. It's just the leaders that need some help and support in understanding what that looks like for them.
Can I come in with first interruption? And my brain is going to explode if I try and digest any more, Claire, before trying to situate my soul in this conversation. So your experience of marketing director come, community transformation project. I very much relate that to my story and Ethos's story, where if you go back to Annabelle, Tony and Rob, and when we started Ethos Mark 1 24 years ago in EY, my frustration started inside EY because of the organizational boxes and bureaucracy, really standing in the way of us doing good solutions. And it was the organizational design that continues to motivate me, just how inept we are societally actually solving problems, because we put boxes around things and go, right, you're a high street. Or, in the case of that marketing, come consumer, come shop owner business, we tend to situate people as, well, are you a consumer, are you a producer, are you a marketer, are you a shareholder, investor, government? And we just have this mess of boxes in how we organize society that is just so suboptimal, because we don't do the self-evident thing of focusing on solutions and people and planet, which is kind of what the Ethos mission is. But not everyone is lucky enough to kind of just have that aha moment. And on this podcast, we're trying to get the aha moment, whether you're young or old or rich or poor, about what was it that, you've just very clearly articulated. And I have to confess, I haven't yet read your book, because I haven't bought it, but I will do, and encourage everybody else to do that. But I apologise for that. But I'm sort of filling in the bits. But you were lucky enough, from marketer to community organizer, to kind of have the moment, if you like. And we had the moment outside of an organizational context, in 65 young people who didn't have work, and we offered them a job, and we said, "Well, you make it up," and they made so much more sense than boxes. Because I believe that human nature is really quite smart and agile, adaptive, that actually we're sort of born with this stuff. It's the boxes that take us away from that. So so here I'm gonna get to the question, just like, here we go, right, Rob, what is it? Here we go.
Come
So
on.
the question is your theme of all we need to do, Rob, is change the mindset. But when you are the frog being boiled slowly in the pan of water, which is my analogy for saying you live in a role in an organization and you're a marketer, it's sometimes impossible as a chief exec, and we speak to many of them, or without taking them out and putting them on the high street, using your example, for them to, or them having a life-changing moment because they lost their son to a road accident, or they suddenly decide find they got cancer or something, and these things tend to, boom, they sharply shock us into waking up and looking at things from a different perspective. How on earth do you do the mindset change without taking somebody's child away, or giving them cancer, or a life changing moment? How do you help people see mindfully?
So I think I'm probably ringing up tomorrow with a few more answers, but my immediate response to this would be, I think people know they're being boiled right now. I mean, I don't see people, the most people I talk to, I sense have all come to because they're not happy. Things aren't working well. And even on a commercial point of view, things are not working well for them. Productivity levels are down, absenteeism are up. The signs are there that this is no longer working. It's no longer fit for purpose. So I think of course, extreme dramatic interventions in your life will create that. But I think in that the universe is sending us quite a few dramatic interventions enough, from the financial crash onwards. I think we are shifting, but I think there is an internal trauma. I think people are finding things very difficult anyway. I think there's lots of anxiety and stress and overwhelm at the moment, and a sense of, I was asked the other day, what are the signs, in my opinion, that leaders aren't coping? And I said, well, there are 3 signs, in my opinion, that they rehash old ideas because, we keep going back to what we've done before and expecting it to work. So think, off the shelf ideas that don't no longer work. They become, they create a very toxic environment, a very blame environment, because it's all about pointing the finger at somebody who hasn't done something right. So there's an expectation that there's a right and a wrong, and when things don't go according to plan, so they get increasingly stressed. So there's a stress and then a blame culture that comes out of it. The second idea just came in my head and disappeared again, but I do have 3, but I'll come back to you the third one. But it's that sense that, going back to what we've done before because you don't have any new ideas, and creating an environment where everybody is getting, you're trying to control things that you have no control over, which is why I go back to this thing about the importance of focusing on, if you're working in an environment where things aren't working, you need to go back to the drawing board, like I did to the high street. Is this still what you're supposed to be doing? It may no longer be fit for purpose. That doesn't mean to say you need to throw everything away. It just means to say you need to rethink it. So, and then you need to think about where you have influence to change it. So I think there's already signs that people aren't okay. I think the signs are that, there is a considerable unease about how to handle the world and how to handle things at the moment in almost every sector that I've been involved in, whether it's politics, retail, local authorities. It feels to me that people are out of their depth, and I think they know it.
I haven't got a button that is like pausing Claire button, so I'm going to put my hand up like that. I love your almost your ability to disarm people. Anybody you talk, me, I just like, okay, right, let's just tell it how it is, and I think that's a beautiful gift. And I try when I'm talking to people wherever they are, whatever their leadership, to emulate that sort of honesty where you have a conversation with someone, you go, yeah, but what's it really, what, and then eventually and slowly, because trust takes a long time to build, you kind of get that trust. And then individuals find it very, 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 very difficult to share that level of transparency with other people in their lives, whether they're subordinates or bosses or peers or family or friends, where it's actually, there's stuff I'll tell you, Claire, that I wouldn't. And in many ways that reminds me of the not being ageist, but the old-fashioned management consultants, where you were a trusted friend. You weren't going to try and deliver here's a process that you just need to go through to do some star jumps and everything will be okay, because actually this is about being honest with yourself and honest with others, isn't it? So it's kind of, so I bet you immediately get honesty with the people that know you, because it's just, how do you get them to be honest with, how do you get them to sort of go, so, because that's that vulnerability, isn't it? We hear it so much that, being vulnerable to people who work for you, that can be fantastic, but it takes a lot of self-confidence, it takes a lot of guts, and it's very scary to just go, do you know what, I don't know the answer, I think it's all broken and this is all nonsense and I'm the boss, what am I supposed to do, leave?
So I think that's it's a really good question, and in answer, it's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I think what I want people to know is that, well, number one, I want people to be inspired by the fact that I've worked with leaders. I describe leaders in two categories of scavenger. There's what I call the scanners and the scourers. So the scourers are leaders like me who set something up from nothing, and kind of unlike me, went on to achieve incredible success within, a matter of years. So, global success from nothing within 5 years. And those are incredible leaders, because they literally have to work with whoever walks through the door, and all they have is this sort of beaming idea that people are attracted to. But what is so incredible about these people is, they're the least likely, in many cases, they're the least likely people to be leaders that you might imagine, but they are highly successful, and they're very, very successful at creating highly effective teams out of random groups of people. So that speaks to what we were talking about earlier. Don't box people in. It's, create the space where people can come and learn together. If you have something that connects people, then the job is a learning job. It's not a job of, it's how can you learn quickly together, and how can you make sense of something. The other thing I'd say, which is very important about the scavenger mindset, is recognizing this is not about going, change everything and start all over again. This is about looking at where you're already at and identifying some small spaces, small things that you can begin to do, because it's an apps. I mean, the other type of my scanners are leaders who work in these much more established conventional organizations, and yet they have also achieved transformation by looking beyond those labels and those functions, and just saying, look guys, what can we do here, and bringing people together in a very different way. And the biggest challenge they had, because here they have the resource, here they have the sort of, the budgets, here they have the people around them immediately. So, but their challenge is really tough, because their challenge is about building confidence and capacity within to behave differently and to approach things differently. So that is, in those cases, these people literally just began to try small things differently. And I think that is the critical thing. This is not about this. Here's a model. Here's how you do it. There you go. And every organization follows the same thing. It's about working out what you actually have. It's about working with leaders on an individual basis first to give them a sense of what could be achieved, what is possible. Sometimes, Rob, it's about giving people hope. Giving people hope that actually, whilst they can still be in a sort of an authoritative position, they can also build a narrative around that allows them to start opening up discussions and building a different way of operating. But it isn't done overnight, and it's done in small ways, so you feel comfortable in that process. And in doing that, you learn. So the phrase I use a lot is, you've got to look again and look deeper at what you already have, is your
And
first step.
if you remember, I just said my frustration with organizational design. How might you design organizations different? So one way of interpreting, and may be wrong, what you've just said in terms of the scavenger and scanner, is community development being quite bottom up. You take a high street, you take a group of people, and and then the scanning being quite a top down. I had dinner last night with a chap. There's 100,000 employees in the company. It's a global organization, 100,000 people. It's bigger than a high street, and so the mindset of community organizing is just is quite a long way off. Now I've had experience of where those two groups of types of individual, those groups of individuals, are like oil and water. They don't see one another, as coexistent. It's kind of like my way or the highway. I'm a big fan, having worked in lots of big organizations, of bottom up, actually. But that's just my preference. I get, if you are 100,000 people, you cannot just go, let's organize 10 people and see what happens for the whole organization like that. But what are your experiences of getting those two groups to actually recognize each other, work with one another, cooperate, collaborate, and trust? This is kind of this, if only we could actually work between the boxes. We see that, that is a mindset difference. Do you have any thoughts on how the scanners and scavengers?
I want to just add to that, sort of, how do we sort of moderate this embedded desire to compete always, which is not a bad thing, but it is if it becomes too much. I think, how are you getting that balance between competitive and collaborative? That's quite important, I think. It feels important.
A couple of trivial questions there. While you're thinking, just like, boom.
So, of course, there's very few silver bullets in life, but I think there's a golden gun. And I think that it's all about your approach in terms of, so working sometimes. So there's a couple of responses to this, and I'm thinking now of some of the examples I've got. So in some ways, it is a matter of what you want. I mean, there'll be some leaders who actually don't want to, they can't change, they don't want to, and they're embedded in it, and by all means. But most people I talk to, once I've had some sort of conversation, I think it's about inspiring. I think it's about making people feel hopeful about, actually, there are some other ways of thinking about this. This isn't just my heavyweight responsibility. I can create something, but it doesn't have to be all, hair, shirts, and dancing around fires, or I can't think of the hippy dippy thing, but it's not. It's actually about being far more effective. For me, this is actually quite a commercial, quite a ruthless thing. It's about, how the hell are you going to survive? And do you want to survive? What is it you're worrying about, and what's the outcome you're looking for here? And and you'll know this. I mean, there'll be some problems in the world which carry on as you are, my love, because that's exactly the right approach. By all means, the tame problems of the world which fit into a spreadsheet, which are complicated but ultimately solvable, by all means, crack on. But increasingly, we are being flooded by complexity, which things are changing, and there's different stresses coming in, and your multiple shareholders or agendas that are coming in. There isn't a clear answer. As soon as you think you've got it, it changes. So there's lots of different types. There's crisis problems, there's complicated problems, and then there's complex problems. And when you have complexity, which I believe most of us are facing now, there does need to be a different approach. And that's a bit where I think people feel out of their depth. And so understanding where somebody is in that spectrum, are they in a state of actually somebody said to me the other day, the way for you to describe the clients that you work with, Claire, is how fucked up are they? Because if they're really fucked, then you need to, sorry, I probably shouldn't say that. But people need to see, are they boiling or are they feeling, nah, it's all right. And there'll be some people for whom this isn't really a big issue. They think they've got control or they have got control, and that's fine. But there are increasingly people who are feeling unhappy, stressed, overwhelmed, overloaded. And those are the areas that I think you can talk to and begin to say, this is not the only way. There are different ways to approach this. And nearly always, when you ask somebody what it is they want to achieve, what it is they're really fearful of, you then come up with sometimes a really good question. And for me, the big shift change, and Annabelle, I'm going to come on to your answer in a minute, sorry, is to think of things in terms of questions. So it's a sort of putting out to your organization. I mean, the obvious example that's come to my head is the carpet company Intersection, who, were brilliantly successful for a long time. Thank you very much. We make carpets. Boom, shanker, job done. And then at an AGM, somebody asks a question about being environmentally friendly. And this wasn't something they particularly thought about. But nonetheless, the chief executive, Ray, went home, had a dream that night about, this is something I ought to do something about. I've never really occurred to me before. Didn't have any answers like me. Didn't know quite how you went about it. But just thought, this is something I should ask my organisation. I'd like to get them thinking. And for me, the critical point about that, and back in my day of the high street, the thing I did wasn't to say, I've got the solution here. Here's a problem and here's my solution. Therefore, everybody's expecting to just sit back and go, okay, then Claire, crack on. This is a really good way to start working out what you really have. And he asked a question of his organisation. Where do you believe we can become more environmentally aware? Where might we be able to? And as a result of that one question, the whole organisation, some didn't, some did more, but those who were engaged, got engaged with that, it became a new energy source. It took nothing away from their ability to make bloody good carpets. I'm assuming they are. But what it did do is it created a whole new level of energy and motivation. And one of the things I've learned, which I think is possibly the most important thing I've learned, which is the conditions, the elements you need to create really high performance teams and high performance companies. And these three elements are really simple and they're accessible to everybody and they're free, but you need to invest in them. Time. When people feel valued, when they feel connected, and when they have a sense of their own agency or ownership, you create the single most powerful working environment that you could possibly find. And that's what he did with the carpet company. Okay, I'm asking a question. What came back is where you start. It's like me. I'm asking a question of the high street. I don't know who's going to be engaged and who wants to do it, but let's start with what we've got and let's work from there. So it doesn't have to be an all organizational thing. Let's change it all overnight. Let's just ask a question of something that really matters and see what happens. And it's not going to dislodge anything that anybody else is doing. It doesn't need to, but it does mean that it can create a real energy, and it can bring forth some brilliant ideas and insights from people that perhaps you don't normally speak to, from people that perhaps you would normally. So it didn't matter whether it was an accountant who came up with the idea for the recycling the fibers to create the fishing nets, which changed the lives of fishermen in third world countries. It doesn't matter whether it was the idea from the secretary. It didn't matter. It was like a question for the company. And that's what brought something really transformational, magical together. And in terms of the competition, I think, I was working for a while with a very well-known retailer. And this was the point, Annabelle, that we came to, which we realised was the big problem, was that she worked in this department and it was very separate from that department, and they were quite competitive. So one of the things that we did was to say, what's the big goal here? Because if the company goes down, you all go down. It's great that you've got an element of competition. By all means, keep that in your own way. But if you don't work together now, if you don't just go, right, let's bash down the walls here and think beyond our boundaries to what we could be and what matters most to us and where we have real power, then you're getting smaller and smaller, and you're dividing and dividing, and you're creating that sense of it's their fault because they didn't get that offer. It's your fault, because how helpful is that? The amount of time and money that's wasted on pointing a finger because something's going wrong. The reason it's going wrong is because you're not pulling together. You're not seeing that there's something here you're aiming for, and what you're aiming for is survival. And hopefully a little bit more than that. Once you've got survival, you can then do something really marvelous and life-changing if you want to. But where is your focus at the moment, and what matters most? So I have 5 questions which I say to people. What is your intention? What is it you're really trying to do here? What matters most about that? Where does your influence lie? How do you know that's true? I mean, I did this with the high street. How do we know it's true that the most important thing here is that, you've got that parking rents and rates? It's not true. Do you have any influence over there? No. Well, then let's think about what you can do. And then the last question is, so what small actions do we need to take to start learning about what we could be? So it's all in my book, but it's a process of just getting people to rethink but not in a frightening way, in a way which is exciting. It's like, well, what could we be? Everything you need is right here. If you can believe that, if you can see that your role as a leader is not to be right, but to create the conditions where we can all be successful, then it changes the narrative and it opens something up quite significant. So competition's important, but what's more important here is that you see yourselves as working together, which doesn't stop people having different functions. It doesn't need to, but it just let's aim for the bigger thing here, and then work out how you can fit into that. Does that even begin to answer any of your questions there?
Oh yeah, but
definitely.
I mean, it resonates massively, with our 25-year journey with Value Exchange, which is all about agency. It's all about value, hence the name, and it's about connectivity and understanding, what I can do. What can I do?
Yes.
It's less organizational, more individual. But then, how does that individual meet the organization? So I feel like totally aligned, and yes, let's change the world. But so yes, absolutely is the answer to your question.
And I think,
For me.
with all of these things, changing the world will only happen when people, recognize there's a burning need to do so. And it could be that their business is about to go down, or they feel out their depth, or, there's a sense of, well, for me, the high street is like, well, we can't carry on like this because this isn't going to survive. So that was a very clear sense of we've got to do something and actually just have a go. Because if something, my dad used to have this phrase, which again, I put in the book because I love it so much, which is, if a job's worth doing, Claire, it's worth doing, even if you do it badly. Because the point isn't, if I didn't know if I was going to do the high street well, I didn't know if it was going to work, but it mattered so much to give it a go. And in doing that, you create permission to learn. Because how do we work out what works and what doesn't when you don't know how to do something? What matters most here? What matters most is this is not a ghost town. What matters most is that we end up, and by the end, within 2 years, 4 or 5 new businesses had come onto that high street because they thought it was such a thriving, energetic place. It wasn't that much better than anywhere else. It's just that we had put a concerted effort into trying to do something above and beyond sitting there and expecting people to walk through the doors, because why should they?
Yeah, and
What do you see?
go on.
Annabelle, go on.
No, go on.
What do you see? We've worked with a number of business improvement districts in the past. BIDs. They're a collection. This is not for your benefit, but anybody who's never heard what a business improvement district. They're a group of businesses who take their income. They create this thing called a business improvement disc. I think it's 1% tax or something on the turnover of shops, and they try and organise rubbish collection and collective action, high street. But what wither the high street and business improvement districts at the moment? What do you think we had terrific shocks in the pandemic where lots of our all of the high streets closed down, and a lot of our parking and camera sensing and just collapsed, collapsed and never to come back. But wither the high street, do you have any views at the moment on where the high street's going, what the role of bids and the high street is in terms of your experience of that?
I mean, you'd be surprised to hear I do have an opinion about it, Rob.
Oh,
Shock
that's
horror.
okay.
Really? You, Claire? I mean, again, I don't want to oversimplify things, but I have a phrase I use a lot, which is, on the far side of complexity lies some simple human truths that bind us and create the foundations for real growth and innovation. And those human truths are three things that I've talked about: being valued, connected, and having a sense of agency. And I think wherever you find a community, whether it's a high street community, whether it's a community within a group of people trying to do something or living together, it's like people, humans. When you have a collection or a high street situation, I mean, this is what I said to our businesses: you can no longer compete in the same terms that. This is back, as you say, Annabelle, back in 2008. I mean, the internet was taking off, for heaven's sake. There's no such thing as Twitter or Facebook or any of these things. It was remarkable looking back on that. But, the thing that mattered most to people was having a community that felt safe, that felt like it had a sense of place and energy, where people felt they could belong to, not through prescription, not by saying, love your local, support this, in a sort of demanding way, which is always a very short-term strategy, I believe, but by building something which connects people to their community and allows them to come to it in their own time. So, all we did was we created a space. I mean, we created events, we created functions, we created a platform which gave people a branding, but it was of and for the community. There was no local council stamp on it. There's nothing. It was just very much a sort of, I had this thing which we've earned the right to be charming, because we're never going to be sophisticated or, we're never going to have anything big or marvelous. But what really matters is human connectivity. And so when I talk to the businesses, this really was the role that we visualized. It was, yes, you're selling products. Yes, you've got services you want to sell, but first and foremost, be a community connector. Create something which allows people to feel, yes. I mean, the first event we did was really simple, and they were all really simple, although it took a lot of work to get off the ground. But it was just bring people, become the hosts for your high street. Now, I'm not saying this is exactly what everybody should be doing, but I think it's thinking about those questions. What's your intention? What really matters here? And there are going to be different executions of this, but without doubt, go back to the simplicity of the truth that humans, when they feel connected, when they have that sense of belonging, when they feel valued, so small ways in which people feel valued are always the most impactful. This is not about giving lots. I mean, the biggest lesson I learned, well, I've learned quite a few, but this is another big lesson I learned when I did the high street stuff, when I was asked to come in and consult and advise. The biggest problem they faced was not the outcomes they were looking for, but the approach. And the approach was, here's a lot of money. Now you've got to do something really impactful. And, it's like, wow, all the focus then goes on, how are we going to do this? How are we going to achieve this? And people go, oh, that wasn't very good, was it? And they had failed to do that first bit about looking deep at what was already there. So by the time they left, the initiative had finished. What was left? Well, no legacy of any lasting, sustainable use. It was like people came in to do something, and when they left, there was still this everybody going, well, what are you going to do for us next year? So for me, it's really critical to look again and look deeper at what is already there. Understand the place, get to know where the energy sources live, get to see what could be achieved, and go find what's already there. I've worked in some pretty deprived areas and found the greatest sense of community and potential of any of the areas. And there will be somebody doing something. You will connect them to somebody else. And my big thing is, start small, but start somewhere. Have a very Be very clear about your direction, but be open to the route. Be ambitious, be really ambitious about what you want to achieve. But you start small, you start somewhere and you learn. And all the time, is this still working towards what we want? Is this still the right thing to be doing? So for high streets and bids, I would say look again and look deeper at what you've already got. Create something that's viable. Don't get to be ambitious in your plans, but be humble in your actions. Learn through them. Anything is possible once you've worked out what's there. And we miss that out too much in all the, I would say think about high streets as a connection, as a life force for the community, and a way to express that community on the high street in whichever way feels right once you get to know who's there and what's possible from that. Does that make sense to you?
It does, and of course, being the awkward bugger that I am, I'm reflecting as you're talking. I can't help myself. I just want to listen and not do that. But I'm thinking, does Amazon, and my bank, does Barclays, give me a sense of agency, make me feel that my opinion's valid, give me a sense of community and connection, using your rules. And it is quite interesting actually about almost how purposefully destructive those business models are to those things that actually matter to me as an individual. But I still am using Amazon, and I it's kind of like a drug that I wish I didn't do. I still order loads of stuff from Amazon.
But it does give you it is valuable to you. And it's the exchange is valuable. You want something quickly, and it may not be heartfelt. I mean, I know that Barclays have set up some great Eagle Labs, and they're doing their best within the community in some ways. Because they understand the power of it. And I think we just have to be pragmatic. I mean, the three key things about scavenger leaders are that they are incredibly resourceful, very pragmatic, and because of that, they can become very innovative. But we have to be pragmatic about the fact that Amazon is fulfilling a very important role for you, and there you go. If people want to use it and that's important to them, then just because it doesn't make our hearts sing doesn't mean to say it doesn't have a value for you. And but it's working for them. And, right now that seems to be enough for them. There may be other things they want to do in the future, and I'll be very happy to talk to them about how we can make them even better. But it is for everybody. There is, for every business, as I said, earlier on, there'll be people who are going, no, I'm fine where I am, and none of this makes any sense. But increasingly, there are people saying, no, this isn't working well. I feel out my depth. I feel that this is, any signs of things aren't working well are often about the bottom line. And the bottom line, I don't think, is served well by the sort of the top-down approach for most people anymore. It's a combination. It's not to throw everything away, throw the baby out the bathtub, is it? It's never that. It's about going, okay, that's fine. This is difficult. So let's start in a small way, building capacity and confidence in thinking about how this business could develop, how you could look at this organization a different way, and how you could, because the answers will be there. You already have the people that you need to deliver what you want. And it doesn't matter how small the organization is, or how I'm doing quite a lot of work with charities and, third sector thing. And there is a lot there of people saying, we don't have the budgets, we've got the ambition, but we don't have the budgets, we don't have the resource. And I know, I can say, I bet you have. I know you have. It's just you need to think about what you already have slightly differently.
I want to just come back to your comment about unlikely leaders, Claire, and just how that sits with Rob's earlier comment about people only being motivated to act when there is they've experienced a trauma or they're faced with a crisis. Because I feel sort of part of me, but my mission is to enable to allow people. I would love people to feel, the agency that you talk about, and actually follow your father's advice, which is, if it's worth doing, then do it. So how do
Yeah.
you encourage people to understand that they don't actually need to have a crisis in their life? What they might see and how they might feel it could be the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So how do we get people to sort of act positively, this to lead to the improvements you talk about, without facing a crisis, because there's a lot of, I feel there's a lot of people at the moment who, I agree that we're beginning to feel, things are definitely creaking, there's a lot of pain and stuff, but there's still a lot of people out there who are just like, well, okay, I'm just getting by, it's okay, when actually it's probably now's the time to act, and they're not, but they're not faced with their trauma or their crisis. How would you deal with that?
I mean, I think it goes back to the same thing. I think sometimes it's a fresh eyes on stubborn problems scenario. It's about getting people to see things slightly differently, but not in a non-threatening way. And this is, for me, always about, it's never a criticism or, oh, look, you're so rubbish, you keep doing this in a way. It's about saying what you've been doing has absolutely been right for up until now. But let's just have a think about, so it's about demonstrating through conversations, through workshops, through talks, more and more people connecting them to the fact that what is possible with some small, significant actions. And when you begin to sort of clarify your thinking around where you're at and where you want to be, and when I show people that these unlikely leaders, literally unlikely leaders who aren't qualified, who've never done anything like this before, but managed to sort of create organizations, and they've done them because they've started small and they've set their heart on something that just, I want to see what can happen. It's an explorer's view of the world, a scientist's view of the world. This isn't working, so what can we do instead? And it takes the heat and the pressure off people. And I can only say that in my experience, when people start hearing about some of these stories, the scavenger stories or everyday stories, I mean, everyday leadership exists everywhere. And it's, it's for me, as I said to you earlier on, the big problem I have is not in the everyday leadership thing. It's in helping leaders who feel that they're in this box of having to be right and having to have all the answers and being in control and creating order. They're the ones that need the biggest push, because or the support or the inspiration or the motivation, because they're the ones who feel their value is tied up in being right. I mean, I'm simplifying this, but I'm conscious of time. But so it's a slightly different narrative for different people. But I do a lot of coaching with people, and I think it's the most hopeful thing to know is that you are capable of making change in your life. And I've worked with people who have addictive problems, and just small changes make significant impact. And it's nearly always the small changes that have the significant impact, because it's small changes that are viable and that can be kept going and it don't overwhelm. So it's about taking the overwhelm, the stress out of this situation, and just looking at what matters most and where you have influence, and identifying small change actions that can do that. So it's all about making this non-scary, totally viable, and really exciting, because the results are phenomenal.
Indeed. I'm as you say, I'm very conscious of the time. Rob, do you have anything else you want to raise?
No, I've just bought your book and added it to my reading list, Claire. So, what better reference can you have than our well
I think we
spent in
could
that
go
you've
on.
flogged a copy of
Yeah.
your book to
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah,
kind.
yeah.
That's
Thank
what
you.
I will.
Thank you
Done.
very
That's
much. I was very inspired to have a catch up, and it was great.
we could go
Great.
on forever, I think. I've got
We
loads of
could,
things, but
my feeling is there are more and more people that I'm talking to who get this. And I think, this is not a frightening change everything thing, but I do know that people have had enough. When you look at the macro, you look at the world, somebody said to me the other day, can you sum up what scavenger mindset really means in terms of leadership? I said, okay, well, here we go. It's probably a little controversial, but I said, you could literally ring fence the cabinet, our Westminster cabinet, put them on a plane to Rwanda, and everybody else will be just fine. We've all got this. We can work this out. It's almost our problem are the leaders who are so stuck in this place of, and are out of their depth. And it's, bless them. I don't blame them for all reasons. They're good humans, I'm sure, but they are not the people with the answers. We all are. And, we'll get this right because we don't have a choice not to.
We will. We have to.
Put all the cabinet on a boat to Rwanda. I will vote for that. I think we should be next Prime Minister. Claire, I'm voting. That's your policy objective in a nutshell.
I think you're a winner.
Them all on a boat.
Yeah. Get out of there. Get out of there. Go enjoy yourself in Rwanda.
I mean, silliness aside, I think it's a point well made. I quite like that example because it's just, they've got a few things wrong, but they're doing what they're doing, for whatever reasons they're doing it. But we will, and we have, and we need to sort this world out quite quickly.
Yeah. So we do.
Yeah.
We really do. And all power to you two. I'm so impressed and so delighted that you're still going strong. And honestly, you've been inspirational and you remain inspirational. So, let's keep going. Let's keep
exactly.
All of us.
Let's keep going.
You're doing great work, guys. Thank you.
I'll put you on the mailing list to buy the book then when it comes out.
Please do. Absolutely.
All right.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire.
See you later.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.